Story gameplay integration is something that has been integral to Fire Emblem since the very first entry. For those of you who are unaware, story gameplay integration refers to when something that happens in the story actively has an effect on what happens during gameplay, and vice versa. This can range from small things like in Sacred Stones, where Seth starts off the prologue injured from his fight with Volta in the game's intro cutscene, but it also accounts for stuff like permadeath, which was one of the franchise's main appeals until it wasn't. These games sometimes have some of the most intricate of details woven effortlessly into the gameplay, but other times, the gameplay just completely contradicts what the story is trying to tell us. As a quick example, let's look at Conquest. We get an entire cutscene of Ryoma telling us about how he's gonna get his revenge, and how to fight to the death, but then the game has to force in the gimmick of the map, which then led to one of the most meme-worthy pieces of dialogue to ever come out of this franchise. Prince Ryoma will wait patiently for his revenge, but only for 25 turns. After that, he will begin his assault. The fact that they specified that not only is he waiting, but he's waiting patiently, shows that the developers were probably in on the joke too. There's no way that a human can unironically read this piece of text right after the cutscene that just played and go, yeah, that makes sense. But I digress. The reason you might hear people praising the older games for having excellent stories, despite their characters having a total of 2 lines of dialogue each, is because of how the gameplay acts in tandem with the story, which lets the player experience the story from a pretty direct perspective. We're not just told how strong the holy weapons are in FE4, we're straight up shown them in the prologue, and it makes for a story that can only really get told through a video game. But alas, we don't get that same magic from modern Fire Emblem games, and the reason is simple. In order for a story to get weaved into gameplay effectively, the game's map design might have to take a hit. One of the main criticisms and complaints you'll hear about FE4 is how the maps in this game are absolutely massive. In fact, some may argue that they're so big to the point the game becomes a slog. And as much as I loathe to hear people insult Kaga, this is a fair criticism of Drenalgia the Holy War. The enormity of the maps in this game, and their associated tedium, are just a consequence of the scope of this game's story. Modern Fire Emblem games fortunately don't repeat this mistake. The maps aren't boring because they're built around the game's story, but rather, they're boring because they're poorly designed. Jokes aside, this approach isn't inherently flawed. Not everyone wants to move their units 50 squares across a mostly empty forest for the bare half of an hour, and that's okay. You're entitled to your wrong opinion. But one thing that is pretty universally agreed upon that's stupid in Fire Emblem is how many times they reuse bosses across different maps. Part of the appeal of Fire Emblem was the fact that people die when they are killed, but for some reason, this doesn't apply to enemy bosses, since Hubert's playing in casual mode and just refuses to die even after his 5th defeat. Older games did this too occasionally, but they do sometimes mention why the boss just doesn't get killed off once their HP hits 0. And in general, these games just reused bosses a lot less than the newer games do. But hey, if the player can turn on casual mode, then I guess it's fair to let the enemies do the same. So now that I've finished unapologetically repeating the same 2 jokes that everybody else in the fandom makes, I should probably give you a solution. And that solution is Shozo Kaga. His games are pretty much known for gameplay story integration, so if you don't like fighting the same 5 bosses for 3 chapters in a row, go play one of those games instead. You already played the Judgel games? Well then go play the other Fire Emblem-like games that Kaga made. These games are almost universally praised by everyone who's played them, and for good reason. To give a quick example of how the game mixes its story with its gameplay, is Raquel from Tldr Saga. She's a pre-promoted unit who you get less than 5 chapters into the game's story, and is a walking FE4 reference as well. Now of course the game can't just hand you over a broken unit for free with no strings attached. So what does the game do to balance Raquel, you may ask? Well, it's quite simple. During her recruitment conversation, it's mentioned how she made a vow to never kill another human. And so, if you make Raquel attack an enemy that's human, she'll leave them at 1 HP, but won't ever actually kill them. And this inability to kill doesn't actually apply to enemies that aren't human. This is only just one example of how these games use story gameplay integration to its advantage, to the point it feels as though you're playing through a story rather than a video game. But with all that said and done, I'll see you guys later.